Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to a new video. So today I'm going to show you how I would approach a portrait and how I would start sketching it. So I think this is a very important subject and something that many of you probably are interested in, and hopefully you'll be able to learn something from this video. So what you see on the screen is Clip Studio Paint, which is my program of choice just because I think it's the best for digital artists. And then I also have a reference on the screen that I found on Pinterest, and that's the picture that I'll be using for this demonstration. So before we start, I just want to say that I'm not trying to create something awesome here. I'm not trying to draw something that looks really nice and pretty. I just want to show you the technical side of things so that you get an understanding on how to draw a portrait. So if we just zoom out of our reference, let's focus on a few things before we even start drawing. So we want to analyze our reference and see what's going on. So there are a few landmarks that I always look for when I start drawing a portrait. So first off, I look for the eyes, and usually the eyes are right in the center of the face. So if we look at the top of the head and the bottom, the eyes are somewhere in the middle. And I also see that they are kind of slanted. So the eyes are kind of going upwards. So if we look here and here, they're going kind of up. And so this is really important to me. And another thing I look for is the center line of the face, which dictates the angle. So this right here. These are like super important landmarks for me, and you should recognize them all the time. So I kind of messed it up here, so it actually goes down like this. So this is our center line. This is the top of the head, bottom of the head, and this is the position of our eyes. So this is really important to me. And the rest is something that I figure out while sketching. So let's just keep this in mind. And again, as I said, I'm not going to focus on creating something that looks super nice. I just want to show you the very basic structures that I set up for drawing portraits. And so what I do usually is I start with a circle. And the circle doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a rough guideline for us that we'll use to kind of set up our structure. So I set up the circle, and then I look for the center line that goes down the face, and I try to kind of like just block it in. Then I try to draw the jaw, and I try to stay as close to the reference as possible. And so you always have to kind of compare things to each other. So you want to look for distances between different features. And so if for example, the circle, when I look at my reference, if I create a new layer here, the circle represents this shape right here. And so now what I have to do is I have to figure out this part right here. So this is our jaw, this is the circle. And so we need to figure out this shape and get it as close as possible to our reference. This just takes practice, and you need to kind of play around with it, and don't be afraid to use the eraser if you feel like you've messed up or it's not close enough, then just use the eraser and start over. And so now that we have this, I think this looks pretty close to our reference. I can focus on the eyes. So as I said, the eyes are almost in the middle of the face, and they're going upwards a little because she's kind of at an angle. So we need to kind of replicate this in our sketch. So I look for the center, which is about here. And then I draw the upwards line. And so it's really important to kind of set up this framework for your sketch. And now once you're more advanced and a little bit more capable, you actually don't need to sketch this out anymore because you'll see it inside of your head. But in the beginning, it's super important to kind of set up this frame, this structure that'll help you out in figuring out the anatomy and the proportion of the human face. So now that we have this, we can work on the neck and other things, but this is like the most crucial step, setting up a framework that is close to the reference that enables us to move forward with more complex things. So what you want to do in the beginning is you want to simplify the head as much as possible, and always think in the most simplest shape that you could apply to whatever it is that you're drawing. So even if it's a car, a house, whatever, think in the simplest forms that you could build this out of. And so in this case, it's a circle and this kind of boxy shape for the jaw. So if we go back to our sketch, what I would do next is, as I said, I would block in the neck very roughly. I'm not looking to create something stunning here. And by the way, even when I'm not doing a video like this and when I'm just sketching for myself, in the beginning phases, my drawings always look terrible, and that's because I don't care about making a nice drawing in the beginning. That comes much later once I'm more invested in the drawing. But in the beginning, I'm just trying to set up a nice framework that I can use later on for my final drawing. So here again, I just sketch it out as roughly as possible, and I like to move quickly. So kind of like this. Then I look for the ears. So I see that if we look in our reference and we see this point here of the eye, so the corner point of her eye. And so if we look at her ear, it's kind of at the same height. So the top of her ear is at the same height as the corner of her eye. And so this is a nice guide for us to use. And then if we look here, we'll know that it's lower than the nose, and it's kind of like where her mouth starts. So the bottom of her ear goes all the way down to her mouth. And so this is a really nice guide for us as well to use. So why not just use it and block in her ear real quickly, like this. And again, I just keep measuring things, and it's probably not going to be perfect, but we'll have something to work with. And so what I've done here, for example, with her hair, I looked at the reference, I saw that her hair is coming down to here, and this is where this part ends. And I saw that it's lower than the bottom of her ear. So that's what I've done here. I measured this distance to here. And so as you see, I keep measuring, and that really helps tremendously, because if you don't do this, it's kind of like just guessing, and you don't want to be guessing all the time, because that's just going to make it super difficult for you. You actually want to measure things to each other and see how they are placed and how they are positioned, and that just makes it super easy. So again, I just keep sketching here like this. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get a feeling or a sense for my reference. I'm just trying to figure it out, and I'm trying to understand it. And so once we have this, it's looking pretty good so far. We can actually draw in her shoulder. And so this is pretty close. It's obviously not perfect, but it's a starting point. And so if you're able to do this, you basically are halfway done, because this is like super important, this step. So going back to our reference, what I see right away is that this center line that comes down her face is kind of angled. So if you look at the edge of my screen here, the distance here isn't as wide as the distance here. So I see that it's kind of at an angle, the line, and mine is kind of coming straight down, which is kind of bothering me. So let's just erase my guideline here and try to correct that. So it's more at an angle, like this. And also I have the feeling that her chin is lower than in my sketch. So her whole face is a little bit taller. So let's just correct that real quick. And this looks much better. And also if we look at her cheekbone right here, it sits a bit higher than in my sketch. So I just erase this part and correct it real quickly. We can now start sketching in the facial features. And so you probably need some some experience with anatomy. So what I would do is I would pick up some anatomy books. There are some great ones by Andrew Loomis or George Bridgman, or there's another book by a guy called Michael Hampton. I'll post the links in the description below. And those books are like super useful, and they show you a lot of things about the human anatomy. And so I would recommend you guys picking them up and kind of flipping through the pages and doing your own studies. And also, if you're watching this video, I would advise you to kind of sketch along. So don't just watch it and listen to me. Actually sit down, pick up a pencil, and give this method a try for yourself. Because many times what I've learned personally is that when I watched a tutorial, I didn't learn a lot just by watching it. I actually needed to give it a try myself, and I needed to sketch along. So if you have the time to sketch, then pick up a pencil and just follow along. If I'm moving too fast, if I happen to move too fast, then just press pause and kind of work in your own pace. Don't try to rush it. You don't have to be as fast as I am. Just take your time and try to really understand the principles that I'm trying to explain here. So anyways, now that we're this far, I think it's about time that we start working on the facial features. And so what I like to start is with this little curve that appears right above the nose that goes up to the eyebrow. There's a small curve that appears right here, and it goes up to her eyebrow. And this only works with the eyebrow that is facing away from us. So this is the eyebrow that is facing us, so that is closer to us. And we don't care about this one yet. We only care about the one that is facing away from us. So if we go to our sketch, I try to draw this little curve that appears right here. And this will help me out later on in figuring out the position of the eyebrows and also the size of the eyes. So once we have this curve, we can move on with the eyebrows and just roughly block them in. So we don't have to stick to the reference too close yet, because we can always fix it later on, but just roughly block it in. So we'll see that it goes up a little and comes down, and this one goes up and down. So we try to mimic that in our sketch. So it goes up kind of like this, and the other one goes up initially and then down. The next thing that I do is I start with the eyes, and I like to focus on the eye that is further away from us, or the one that's facing away from us. So in this case, it's the one on the left. So I just draw a line like this. So this line right here is what I'm focusing on right now. So her top lid, and it's almost straight. So if we look closer, it actually goes down a little, but it's almost straight. And so once I have figured out the angle of the top eyelid, I like to figure out the angle of the iris. And so I see that it's making this curve. And so it's this circle. And then I focus on the bottom lid, which is right here. And it's actually going down a little. And so I try to sketch that in. And here's the eyeball, which kind of rounds off here. And so let's just sketch that in, and maybe sketch in some eyelashes. So her eyelashes are right here, so let's just sketch them in real quickly. And so if we look at the crease up here, this is what I want to focus on next. So we drew the top lid, and now we want to focus on this crease that happens above the lid. It's called the epicanthic fold, I believe. And so we're just gonna sketch it in roughly. It's kind of angled upwards, then straight, and then down. And so a nice trick to use when you're sketching is, or at least that's something that I like to do, is I like to draw very angular. So instead of using rounded shapes and stuff, I draw in angles. So if you look at my sketch, it's very angled. So here is an angle, then it kind of angles down. These are like all very sharp angles. So it helps me in measuring when I'm drawing in straight lines instead of curved lines. So give it a try. It's kind of hard to explain, but it definitely makes it a whole lot easier for me to sketch. So whatever it is that I'm sketching, if it becomes complex, I like to draw very angular. So with the second eye, there's a nice little trick that I do, and that is I look at the top eyebrow here, and then you see this little shadow appearing here. Like the skin is darker here than it is here. And this actually gives me a line coming down to the corner of the eye, so right here. And so I look for this angle, for this line that is happening here. So if we return to our sketch, I can just sketch in this line. And now I know where my second eye has to start, because this point right here is this point in our reference. So that's very clever and an easy method to figure out where to place your second eye. And then I just, again, in very angular shapes, I kind of block in the second eye. I always start with the top lid before I do anything else. So in this case, I look for the top lid that is right here. And that's what I try to block in my sketch. Next up is the iris, and then the bottom lid. So let's do that real quick. So we're gonna sketch in the iris. So roughly try to get it right. And then the bottom lid as close to our reference as possible. And then of course we also have to do the crease on top of the lid. And so we just look at how tall it is and just roughly sketch it in. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to figure out your reference. You want to understand it and analyze it and get as close to it as possible without trying to be too perfect. Like if you're trying to be too perfect right from the get-go, you'll make it super hard on yourself and it's not going to be a lot of fun. So in the beginning stages, just be very loose. Just try to figure out the different placements and positions of the individual features. And then later on, once you start painting or inking or whatever, that's when you have the time to pay more attention to smaller details. At this stage, I don't really care about any of the details. I just want to figure out the basic structure of my reference. So now that we have the eyes, we can focus on the nose. So if we look at the nose, we already got this little curve that is appearing up here. And so now we need to figure out the length of the nose and how tall it is or how large it is. We know that our eye is right here. That's our bottom lid. We just look at the distance from the bottom of our eye, so the bottom lid, how far it goes down, and also the distance right here. So there's this little triangle, and we try to match that up. So if we go to our sketch, we'll just try to match that triangle. And you can actually see the tip of the nose right here doesn't actually touch her cheekbone. There's a little gap in between it. So we need to make sure to keep that little gap and not to kind of make it touch the cheekbone. We want to still have that little gap appearing right here. So again, you'll see this pattern happen oftentimes when I'm sketching. I always look for distances between different features when I'm drawing a portrait. So I try to measure the distance between two eyes. I try to measure the distance from the nose to the mouth. And all these different features help me in figuring out the overall proportions of my subject. And so now that we have this, we just need to kind of sketch in the nostril. And again, I'm being very loose here, not perfect at all. Now that we have the nose, I focus on the mouth. One thing that I do is I look for two landmarks. So let me just pick a different color and I'll show you the landmarks. So for one, if you look closely, there's a line coming down right here. So you'll see that the skin is darker here than it is here, and there's a line coming down. So I look for this line in my reference. Sometimes you won't see it as easily, but here it's pretty visible. So first you want to notice this line, and also you want to notice how far her lip goes out to the left. So we look at her nose, and her nose is right here, and you'll see that her lip isn't quite out there. It's not as far out as her nose, and that's really important to know because you could easily end up drawing your lip right here. And obviously it's going to look off because it's further out than her nose. But in the reference, her nose is actually further out than the lip. So that's important to know. So what I do first is I try to sketch in this angle right here. So this is the angle. There's this little dip. And so instead of drawing this little dip, I connect the top point here and this point here and just draw a straight line across. I sketch in this little line. Then I see that her lip is coming down almost straight here. And let me just sketch that in. Next, I look for this point and the corner point on the right of her lip. And you'll see that it's kind of angled. Like this point right here is lower than this point, but only slightly. So I try to kind of figure that out in my sketch. Here's this one point, and so I try to draw out a line to the second point. And again, when I'm looking at my reference, I look at the nose right here, and I see that the point, the corner point is further out than her nostril. So I need to figure that out in my sketch. So I look at the nose right here, and I look at the corner point, it's further out, and so my point needs to be roughly here, and then I just connect it like this, and that's it. So we got the top lip. Now we need to figure out the bottom lip, and what I do for the bottom lip is I just draw a simple line which represents the shadow in my reference right here. So next up, we want to add some more detail to our lips, and what I do here is I just look for this gap right here because she has her mouth slightly open, and so we just need to kind of figure that out, and I just eyeball it. So I look for this line right here and the center line of the dip, and so I just sketch that in roughly. And so this is how I would start sketching a face. And so at this point, we basically have established our structure, our framework. Getting to this point is so important. And I think this is one of the steps people struggle the most with. I think it's important to kind of slow down when you're doing this and just focus on your reference. Like, try to really analyze it and understand it and break it down into the simplest shapes that you can think of. Alright, so that was the first technique that I used when drawing portraits. And so now I want to show you a second technique that I like to use. This is a little bit more freehand, freestyle drawing. It takes a lot of guessing, but once you're more advanced and more capable and you have more experience, I believe this is the better way to do it because it's a lot quicker. You don't have to set up a guideline for your drawing because everything happens inside of your head. You're basically seeing things without drawing them onto your paper. So I'm going to show you the second technique that I like to use. If you feel like you're a little bit more advanced, then follow along and try to see if the second method works a little bit better for you. So again, what I look for is the angle of the eyes. So I just draw a straight line, but a little bit tilted. Then again, I look for this little curve that appears above the nose. And I sketch in the first eye. And here I'm working very quickly. I'm just trying to sketch it out as quickly as possible without thinking too much about any of the details or complex shapes. And I see the guidelines that I showed you in the first method, but I don't sketch all of them out onto the paper, but I see them when I look at the reference. And you see that I'm moving very quickly. but I'm still seeing all of the same principles that I showed you in the first method. And this is just much quicker to me, but also because I'm way more experienced and I've done this for a long time, so it doesn't require a whole lot of effort for me to do this. But if you're not yet capable of working this quickly or in this style, then don't worry, like don't freak out or anything. It's not important to be quick at all. So many beginners, they think that they have to be fast, but that's not really important, at least not in the beginning. So don't focus too much on speed and time. Focus on precision and proportions. So you want to be as precise as possible, and just try to be as accurate as you can, and take your time, even if it takes a little bit longer. That's not really a issue. But even here, I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm just trying to quickly sketch out what I'm seeing. But I'm looking for the same landmarks, the same guidelines, and I'm just connecting the dots. And yeah, it's basically the same process, just that I skip the initial phase of blocking things out, of setting up my guidelines. I skip that stage and move straight to some more complex shapes, just to be a little bit quicker here. And then I do the same thing here, quickly block in a jacket. So this is the way I like to work when I'm working on personal pieces. I like to start with the eyes initially and then just work my way around it. And as you saw, it's much quicker. It only took me like 5 minutes compared to the other method, which took me like 20 minutes just to set up my guidelines. But again, I believe the other one is more accurate, but it definitely takes a whole lot more time. You need to be way more experienced to use the second technique, because you're basically eyeballing everything. You're doing a lot of guesswork. It takes a lot more experience and skill. So I would say spend a lot of time figuring out the human anatomy. I know that anatomy can be like super boring and it's really no fun, but the more time you spend learning anatomy, the better your pictures will look in the end. But anyway, so with this video, I just wanted to show you 2 different ways on how I would start a sketch and how I would tackle something like this. So as I said before, if you're a little bit more inexperienced, then take your time and set up these guidelines, the initial framework. And if you're a little bit more advanced, then you can jump right into it and start with something more complex and still get to the same final end result. So both of these methods are valid, and you can use both of them. It just depends on your own preference. I typically use the second method, so most of the time I use the second method, but from time to time when something is a little bit more complex, I like to use the first one just to really analyze my reference and to break it down and to get as close to it as possible. So I do hope that you enjoyed this video, that you learned something from it. And if this helped you in any way, then please let me know in the comments, and also let me know what you want to see in my next videos. That would be like super awesome to know. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, then smash that subscribe button. And as always guys, thanks for watching my video. I love you with all my heart and soul. Peace.